Hi there, it's JD from LearnGeek and Exonify, and today you're joining me for another virtual Q&A. Today we're covering every question asked during my panel discussion on frontline training practices at ATD25 in Washington, D.C. Now I was joined on stage by a panel of four awesome L&D practitioners. We had Rocky Basil from ATD, we had Shannon Davis from Merrick, Stephanie Blakemore from Scooters Coffee, and Susan Casco from 84 Lumber. And the crew spent an hour exploring the latest research into frontline training practices, which I have right here, as well as sharing their experiences with several hundred people that were there live in attendance. And as per usual, conversation ran long, so we didn't have time to get to most of the questions that were submitted by participants. So I reached out after the panel in the weeks that followed to capture insights from our panel that I can bring to you right now to answer every question that was submitted. And like I said, it was an awesome conversation. So we have lots of questions, 37 to be exact. We're going to be here for a while, but don't worry, I'm going to chapter the video on YouTube so you can skip to the topics that are most interesting to you. And we're going to dive right in. Here we go. The most popular question asked during our frontline training practices panel at ATD25 was, how do you find time for frontline training with limited staffing and labor hours? The most popular question, the most popular challenge facing frontline enablement teams today and for years. And that's why there are going to be three parts to this answer. So we're starting out long-winded, but it's important because it's the most popular question and challenge. So three parts to this answer. Number one, you need to do everything you can to avoid the need to ask for labor hours for training. So it starts by taking a hard look at your training programs today and asking the question, is this necessary to do the job? Now, you went through the effort to design, develop, and deliver all of this training. So at some point, it was important. Now, it might have been important because a stakeholder said so. It might have been important because people actually need this help so they can solve a problem and do the job. So start by assessing the value of your existing training. If it's either not required by a regulator or it's clearly not measured in terms of value for the front line, you can't connect it to a business result, cut it and be ruthless. Make sure that every labor hour spent on training is a value add to the organization. Then once you've made your cuts, look at the topics that remain and then ask another question. Is there a better way to handle this? Do people actually need training on this topic, or can we support them through this topic in a potentially different way? Do employees have to recall this information? Do they have to know it? Is this topic so complex that it's requiring a structured approach to helping them improve their knowledge and skill? Or is this something that people can self-serve their way through a particular process? And let's consider a common example, product training. How you handle a topic like product training is going to vary depending on your company, the products that you sell, and your customers' expectations. But if you work in retail and your store sells 50,000 items, how much are employees going to know? Right? How much can they retain, especially early in the job? So are there certain products that you want people to know forwards and backwards because maybe it's a department that they're specializing in, it's a high demand product, it's a product that leads to a lot of conversation, maybe a lot of sales opportunity with customers. But there's also going to be all that other information that people can pull on demand as long as you provide them with the right resources. So the key is looking for ways to rebalance that training need based on what people actually need to know and be able to do on the job, and then how this capability progresses over time, because people can only take in and retain so much, especially when they're new to a role. So you've assessed your training practices, you've made necessary cuts, you've shifted some topics from training to on-demand resources, maybe via a knowledge base, or maybe you have a digital assistant that can provide that on-demand real-time support. So now you're helping people in different ways, right? You've opened up new channels and new avenues. Now you're done, or you're down to the must-dos, the topics that you need to cover. need to cover them properly to meet a company expectation, regulatory requirement, or a customer need. You're going to need to fight for the time that you need in order to provide the proper support for these must-dos. But this is a must-do, right? This is the must-do stuff for a reason. This stuff should be easier to connect to meaningful outcomes for the company. If someone doesn't do this right, they could get hurt. We could get fined. The customer could walk away without making the purchase. And then it becomes your job to connect the dots between these training topics, the must-dos, and the value for the business. This comes with protecting the training time that cannot be cut when labor budgets get reduced, right? This is part of the job. That's the story you're going to have to sell. This is just like stocking a shelf, cleaning the restrooms, checking out a customer. This isn't extra, right? This isn't professional development. This is required part of the job training. But it's a lot harder to argue for protected training hours when you don't take those first couple of steps, right? Take stock of your existing programs and the value that you're providing. So that's why you need to start there, then work your way towards the right argument for why you absolutely need people to take time away from the operation for training. And be sure that you're applying proven practices when you design your training so that when you do have that protected time, you're using as little time as possible. And there's one more thing to consider in this first answer to our virtual Q&A. Think about who you need to make the argument to protect those training hours. How are you helping that stakeholder accomplish their goals today? How are you making their job easier? The most challenging stakeholder for L&D is often middle management, including frontline and location managers, because we tend to ask for more than we provide to them in value, at least in their eyes. So you have to look for ways to influence them, to get them to perceive L&D as a problem-solving partner before you ask for their time. And that's my kind of three-pronged approach to overcoming the challenge of time on the front line. So thanks so much for your question to open up our conversation today. Let's move on to our next question. How do you work around and or collaborate within tech limitations to reach field workers on mobile devices? Now, this will depend on the specific limitations that you might be running into. First, do your field workers have company devices? If they do, you're most of the way there already. Now it's a question of providing the right stuff on those devices, the right applications to help people access information that they need to get the job done. So in that case, you need to work with your tech providers as well as your IT function to really understand the digital frontline workflow, right? Where is the job done? How are these devices being used? And how can you make sure that in the flow of work, these devices can be used to boost knowledge, to access information, to solve a problem, to learn as part of the workflow using those devices most effectively. Then there's a situation where maybe field workers are not provided with company devices. And since they're, by definition, in the field, it's unlikely that you might be able to ask them to, regularly visit a location where they can access digital content on a shared desktop or maybe a kiosk. That might be something that people who are on premises might be able to do regularly. So have you considered a CYOD, a choose your own device strategy in these cases that's going to allow you to leverage both company devices that might exist as well as personal devices and thereby maximize your reach for deskless workers? And we consistently find that frontline employees will opt into using their own devices for work purposes. Now, not every employee wants to do this. And this is especially true in regions where bandwidth and data plans might be limited. And then people are making decisions about, well, do I use my limited minutes, my limited downloads, my limited data for personal use? Do I call my family or do I use it for work? And that's a clear-cut decision. But when that isn't an obstacle or when there's Wi-Fi plentifully available, we see that a significant number of people prefer to use their favorite device when it's especially of benefit to them on the job. So to make a CYOD strategy work, you have to consider a few things. First, are there rules around what people can and cannot do or can and cannot access when they're on or off the clock? Because you may want to lock down certain apps or maybe certain parts of certain apps to help people follow those rules to make sure nobody gets in trouble. So, for example, maybe people in an employee application, maybe they can access their messages when they're off shift so they can stay up to date. Managers can reach them. HQ can reach them. But maybe they can't complete training activities when they're off shift because that's considered work. And of course, they should be compensated for that work. So some organizations also leverage a user agreement when people log in to employee applications, especially on their personal device, so that employees, again, know what the rules are and they can be held accountable to what they can and cannot or should not be doing on a personal device. And then some organizations go as far as gating access to specific applications on personal devices to when people are physically on a network. So you can only get to certain applications when you're at a location, at a job site, at a facility, to make sure that people abide by the necessary rules. So the biggest obstacle to leveraging technology with a deskless workforce is actually the device. So working with your IT partners as well as your employees, you can find the screens. Right? Where do they exist inside the workflow, considering the screens that are likely in your employees' pockets? And then you can determine, well, how do we maximize our reach, maximize people access to timely, reliable resources via those available screens? Hope I answered your question. Thanks so much for submitting it. On to our next submission. How do you convince leadership of the items / equipment / space that is needed for effective product training or effective productive training? The answer is one word. It's results. No one outside of L&D cares about learning theory or strategies or taxonomies or any of that kind of stuff that we talk about all the time. They just want results. You need to show them that an investment in whatever it might be is proven to deliver results that they care about. Now, you can do this in a few different ways. First, you can experiment, pilot, right? Try a new idea with a limited budget, limited scope, limited audience, and show the potential, right? Show that it works, show that there's an outcome. And then we're talking about scaling, expanding that outcome, and that required investment to do so. And when you share those types of results, don't do it from your perspective. Again, it's not about what L&D wants. Bring in voices from the operation. I'm talking about feedback from employees, how this type of solution, this type of idea really helped someone do their best on the job, reach their goal, hit their number. Voices of managers, people who are leading those teams, and stakeholders that hopefully you involve strategically as part of influence in that pilot or in that experiment. Because your stakeholders, they want to see themselves succeed. They want to see people like them that have shared accountability succeed. They want to see that success more than they want you to get your way. And I know that sounds harsh, but again, that's the reality of accountability in the workplace. And then you can also consider, in addition to piloting or experimenting, bringing in examples from outside. Maybe it's a case study. Maybe it's an expert from outside the organization that'll help you build your business case. Where has this been successful before? Right? What results did other organizations see when applying this type of idea or this type of tool? And then how, filling in the blanks, how can we apply that idea in our company, right? Our unique context, our unique challenges, our situation. The reality is that sometimes stakeholders just kind of need to hear your idea from someone else, someone that they haven't maybe put in a box with a predefined purpose, someone that they don't associate with a certain type of approach, certain type of solution, because you may be the expert in the topic. But do they see you that way based on their previous work and experience with you, or maybe it's your team in general? And then if you're using a case study to build the business case, I recommend not just limiting yourself to similar companies or maybe even your own industry. Because if this concept has been applied in other areas, other spaces, other markets, consider bringing in those stories too especially if they're from companies that your stakeholders know and that they respect and revere. And a great example of this is Disney. Disney shows up in a lot of conversations around customer service. And then there are organizations from pretty much every customer-facing industry. That's hospitality, as well as grocery, as well as healthcare, who mirror Disney practices, first of all, because they work. Second of all, because the stakeholders there and the decision makers respect the company. And ultimately, it doesn't matter what you're trying to justify investment for. If it's for a hardware investment, you're trying to buy a new application, facility space, labor hours for more training, you need to demonstrate how this investment will pay off in the immediate and the long term for the organization, and then help stakeholders achieve results that they're held accountable for. That's how you connect the dots, and that's how you justify investment from various stakeholders, including those closer to the front line. Thanks so much for your question. Moving on. How do you provide training, mentoring, developmental opportunities, and visibility to deskless workers and those who may be uncomfortable or resistant to using technology? I know that in a couple of different questions, there are going to be references to either limited use of technology or a level of comfort with technology. And oftentimes I push back on that. I just say, is it discomfort with technology, or is it a lack of value, perceived value, or understanding of your technology, or of the tools that have been handed to people in the past in the workplace and the value or lack thereof that they saw in those tools? Because I'm willing to bet, given where we sit today, a lot of those people walk out of your facility, out of your store, out of your location, and pull a very large smartphone from their pocket and use that to do all types of interesting things. I'm not saying everyone is device savvy or technology savvy. I think we often underestimate or maybe make the wrong connection between where the comfort with technology is and how that's applied in the workplace. So something to consider. But back to this specific question. I take this as a little bit more of a marketing question than a technology question. How are we making sure that people know when there are opportunities within the organization, whether it's job training, whether it's education benefits, whether it's a mentoring program? And I've seen how much of a challenge it can be to get any information to the frontline team in an actionable way. Something I hear about pretty much every year is how hard it is to get people to enroll in healthcare benefits. Something that people find very important, critical part of the job, big reason they work at that organization maybe in the first place. But how do you get people's attention when there's so much going on, so many different places that people receive information from, so many different priorities, and the fact that people might work varying schedules? How do you reach people? So this isn't really just an L&D challenge. This is a breakdown of information flow within the frontline workplace. So the answer is not cascading information from management. It does not work. Someone misses an email through the chain, something else comes up, someone does a poor job of conveying the information at the pre-shift huddle, no one reads the email that's posted on the wall in the break room. That does not work. I'm not saying that those components of communication are not important, especially the manager and especially huddles. But cascading information doesn't work, just like bubbling information up to headquarters also doesn't work. That's a different conversation. But the reality is that just the fact that most frontline workers don't have an email address, as well as they don't have tools like Slack or Teams, just makes them difficult to reach. And this typically isn't a problem that L&D owns or something that we're even tasked to solve, but it is a challenge that limits our ability to get the word out about required training, yet alone self-directed offerings or on-demand or optional development opportunities. So rather than trying to fix this on your own as L&D, we got to talk to some people. We got to talk to peers in corporate communications. We got to talk to operations. We got to talk to knowledge management. Any function that influences or has ownership over information flow within the organization, inclusive of the front line. And we have to tackle the challenge holistically to improve how information moves to and from the front line, because it's a two-way conversation. Communication isn't a push. It's a conversation. So how do we foster and create consistent channels where employees can go to find information and then determine What's a push? What's a pull? What are the rules? What are the guidelines? How do we create a more consistent experience so that employees know where to look and what to look for and not spend their time searching through folders in a SharePoint site that just becomes frustrating and I don't go back, or an intranet that I rarely see, which is where a lot of the information is highlighted. Or again, the break room posting on the second floor of the facility that I never get to because my job is on the first floor. So we have to consider all the different channels available, create consistency in our strategy of engaging and communicating with the frontline team, and then also consider, are there opportunities to incentivize people to engage with these messages? Because we can't just assume, oh, it's important, people will read it. Does that work for corporate teams in email? How many unread channels do you have right now in Slack? Right? Not just the frontline thing. It's an everybody thing. It's a challenge of how noisy it is in corporate communications and how hard it is to see beyond the noise and recognize the signal that's going to be most important to you. So are there opportunities to maybe incentivize people to make sure that they do get the most important messages and they do build that habit of checking certain sources? And again, we control and manage those sources and those channels so that it's consistently valuable and it's not just a lot of noise and every once in a while something that is important. Again, every stakeholder thinks their message is important. We have to have a conversation and collaborate and create consistency and create guidelines so that we have rules around how information moves. Otherwise, you have a lot of people talking. They're all talking to one employee, and we leave it up to an employee who's already got an overflowing task list to figure out who to listen to. So overall, what we need is a knowledge sharing strategy for the frontline where every function, every stakeholder can leverage that same strategy so the frontline isn't consistently chasing different messages and different locations from different stakeholders, and then ultimately falling back on or relying on their manager to provide the most important updates. And that's just one of a million things that the manager has going on today. I wish I could make it simple, but I believe that's how we have to approach the situation because it's been a challenge for so long. And again, so much of it just comes back to, well, people don't have a corporate email address. Thanks for the question. Our next offering, we have a large manufacturing group that is technology averse. See, I told you it was coming up. How do we engage and equip them for technology changes and the movement to Industry 4.0 when it's not a priority in their roles? That last part is the key to the answer to this question. If it's not a priority for their roles, why is it a priority for us? And why would it be a priority for decision makers and stakeholders who influence time and resources? So once again, I don't think this is a frontline question or a frontline problem. It's not a technology problem. It's a prioritization problem. L&D doesn't get to decide what's important in the organization, on the frontline day to day, and then how people use their time while they're on shift. That's a management decision. If management doesn't think it's important, neither should we. Now, if we see change coming, we're looking at the data, looking at the industry, capturing insights, listening, and we believe that we need to start preparing for something, that our teams are going to need new knowledge and skill. We need to be able to make the case to every level of management, the frontline management team that controls the day, executive management that controls the budget. We need to make the case in very practical, grounded, relatable ways. We need to build the relationships and the trust needed to sell those value propositions to people who make everyday decisions. Because again, I mentioned it already. How do people look at you today? Right? Do people look at you as someone who reacts to requests? Right? They're not the team who looks ahead strategically. They're not the team who helps us prepare for the future. They're the team who makes sure the compliance training and the onboarding gets done. Well, if that's the perception, if that's the value that people perceive that we bring to the organization, when you offer something else, it clashes with that perception. It's not perceived as important. So that's why we have to shift that mindset, change our relationship, build the trust, so that when we can step in to where those gaps are, we have the ability to build and then sell the right business case. Because we're going to need buy-in first before we can tackle challenges, whether it be around training, future-focused skill development, introducing new technologies, anything like that. And this is all kind of coming back to that question around order taker versus strategic business partner. And for me, I think the key to making that transition so that people can listen is shifting that value proposition, shifting that mindset, and earning our way to being a problem-solving partner, part of the team, as opposed to being a solution provider or a support function. So hopefully I addressed the question. And thanks so much for sharing. Our next question, in a demanding retail grocery environment, what are some ways to add value to training? Now, first of all, I love the fact that, like I said, this was a panel conversation in a room with a couple of hundred participants. Love the fact that we're seeing so many different industries represented in the conversation. Awesome thing about talking about frontline workforces. So we're now in the grocery retail space. How do you add value to training? For me, the best way to do that is to talk to retail associates and their managers and just find out what's going on. Where are we struggling? What would help you do your job better? And what would make your life easier? And then just do that. Instead of trying to sell people on something that has more of a L&D vibe, something that's more focused on skill development or professional development or career development. What's the problem that you're facing every day? How can I help you solve that problem? Remember, I'm not the L&D person. I'm here to help you. Make your life easier, help you do your job, help you achieve you and your team's goals. How can I do that? That's what value sounds like. And I know that sounds way simpler than things actually are. But this is ultimately what I have found to work. If you want people to take the limited extra time that they often don't have in their shift and dedicate it to engaging with something that you provide, right? A video, microlearning, resources, on-demand assets, whatever you're asking people to engage with, those resources need to clearly help them do the job better, stay safer on the job, make more money, get the next promotion, right? Clear, short-term, as immediate as possible, value proposition for what you're asking for their time and attention and effort for. And then when it works, when someone or a team or somewhere you try something out, when a store location sees value, you need to capture that feedback and then leverage their voices to advocate on your behalf when it comes to the next offering or to expanding that offering to another part of the front line. Because again, it's not about what L&D wants. It's not about what corporate wants. It's about what works on the front line today, and then what works tomorrow, and then what works the next shift. And the one other thing I would say that I think gets left behind in a lot of these conversations about, well, how do we get people's attention? How do we get engagement? How do we get buy-in? How do we get the front line to want to learn? Which again, one of those questions, I think we're asking the wrong question. How do we make it fun? And I'm not talking about L&D fun, because I think L&D fun is different than frontline fun. Kind of know what I mean? We know what we find fun. We know what we find funny and engaging. That's not necessarily what's fun for people doing the job. So you have to separate yourself from what you find to be engaging and interesting and exciting. And again, talk to people who are doing the job, find out what works and what resonates with those folks. One of my favorite microlearning examples of all time happens to be in a retail environment. There's a gentleman out there, runs the HR function. He was trying to help people improve their product knowledge in their retail stores. So he took a phone and he went to the stores and he shot these videos standing alongside a retail associate talking about a particular product. And then in that exchange somewhere, hijinks ensue. So it doesn't get in the way of the message, right? We're talking about this product. Tell me more about this. What customers come in looking for this product? What types of questions do they ask? How do you make an effective sale with this product? Couple of minutes, short form video. But then he finds a way to add personality, to add flair, to add humor. And it's humor that resonates in this culture, in this environment, because he understands the people who do the job and he did the job himself. And it's simple, just a phone and a person talking to another associate. It's fun to people who are doing the job and it gets engagement. In fact, the very first entrance into this series of videos got more views than the company has employees. How many times can you say that about any training video you've ever released when you're just trying to get the audience to review it, yet alone people to watch it multiple times? It's not about the fun, but the fun adds to the engagement. right? It adds to the virality internally to say, have you seen it? Have you seen it? Do you see what he did this time? And along the way, people are getting valuable information they can use to do their job better. That's a balancing act of engagement and value. And I think it takes this understanding. What do those words mean for the frontline workforce? It's not necessarily the same thing that it means to you. Thank you for your question. Up next, we have, what are the most effective motivators that you have found for encouraging frontline workers, especially in distribution or manufacturing? Again, love all the workforces that are represented, to attend optional training sessions. My answer is a question back. Why don't they attend? Do you know? Have you asked? What's stopping people from showing up for these sessions, which I don't know what topics they're on, but I have to believe since you put them together, you're offering these sessions, you're spending money, time, resources to put them together. There's something important here, something useful. You believe that they can very much help people solve a problem. The question then becomes, why are people not seeing that value, right? What's not translating in this experience to something that people want to then spend their time doing? And that kind of extends the series of questions to things like, well, is it too hard to get time away from the operation to go? Maybe people want to go, but there's something blocking them. Maybe they have managers that aren't willing. They don't see the value. So employees don't have the opportunity. Or maybe the sessions are offered at days or times that make it hard for people to maybe come in before work if it's something they can attend optionally before their shift, or stay after their shift if they work a long day. Maybe they're on a 12-hour or a 10-hour bid line, right? What are the dynamics of people attending these sessions? Even if they're high value, there might be blockers in the way that you might not know about. So start there and ask people, what would make this helpful? What would get you in the room? Is it something that should be in a room? Is there another way to provide that information that might be more easily engaged with? And if people don't see value in the experience, or they don't understand the value, you have to work with frontline employees who maybe have attended and benefited from these activities. And again, elevate those voices. Right? Get them to share their story and their perception with peers and with other locations. Because again, it's not about what L&D wants or what L&D thinks is helpful. It's about what frontline employees and managers find to be helpful. And then be as concrete as possible in how you design and then communicate these activities. Simple example, let's say that you're offering a course to help people advance their communication skills in the workplace. Do not call that course Advancing Communication Skills in the Workplace. I don't know what that means. How does that relate to me? I may generally understand that communication is important in the workplace, but do I understand it to the point where I'm going to prioritize my time in that room with that activity as opposed to something else I could be doing, whether it's on or off the job? So instead, tell people to attend, because this program is going to help them speak up and get their ideas heard on the job, because maybe that's a point of frustration for people. They want to improve the operation. They don't know how to be heard. I'm going to help you do that. Or it's going to improve your ability to seek the next promotion. This is a skill set. If you want to be the shift lead, right? If you want to be the location manager, you want to be the foreman, whatever location or line of business you might be in, this is going to help you seek that next opportunity. Critical skill for that. This is going to improve how your team works together, right? These are going to be the critical skills for teamwork that help you hit your numbers in the operation. Contextualize the activity to someone's everyday work experience so the value is clearly communicated. And then people can connect what they do, their struggles, their opportunities, to the activities and the resources that you provide. That's my thoughts. Thanks. How do you tailor the "what's in it for me" message for employees who may see training as extra work or a distraction from productivity goals? Now, one thing I will point out in the question is that training is extra work, right? We need it to be effortful. People need to put in not just their attention, but the effort to learn, because learning is a process in that regard. So it is extra work. We just have to have it perceived as value add, extra effort. Just like anything that you would do, like watching this video, is very much extra work for you. And I highly appreciate you putting in the hours. I don't know how long it's been, but we're not there yet. So I'm going to echo what I said earlier. You don't tailor the message, right? It's not about you telling people what's in it for them. Get people who have had the experience, have felt, have seen, have benefited from the what's in it for them. They put in the time already. They saw the value. Get them to communicate. And in some cases, that might be as simple as capturing quotes and feedback and surveys and things like that. But I often find that saying your peers rated this class a 4.7 out of 5. I don't know what that means. But if I shot a video of someone who looks like you, wears the same uniform that you do, maybe you even know them, and they're saying, yeah, I went to this and it was great because it really helped me solve this particular problem. And it's done in a very frank, practical, relatable way. That's huge value in terms of translating the whiffum or whiffed. What's in it for me? What's in it for them? So it's not about what L&D wants. I've said that a few times. It's about what's most helpful to the people doing the job. I think the best people to communicate that are the people doing the job. So finding and activating those champions within the frontline operation is a huge part of communicating value across the stakeholder ecosystem. So that's my recommendation. Thank you. What low-tech or high-impact strategies have worked well when marketing training sessions to non-desk employees? Are you sensing a trend? If you build it, they will not necessarily come, even if you have coffee and donuts. It comes down to the simple reality that attending a training on the front line is a bigger effort than doing the same thing in corporate. Everyone's busy. Everyone has an overflowing task list, but it's a lot easier to click onto a Zoom or to listen to an e-learning while you're checking your email because you're listening to the audio and waiting for it to stop to click next to continue. You know what I'm talking about. That's a lot easier. Where frontline employees, they might need to find time in a schedule that they don't control. They might need to find transportation if they have to adjust their schedule. They might need to adjust childcare to show up early for a training. And they might just have a boss that doesn't schedule them for stuff. I know what that's like. I once had that boss that just did not schedule me to go to the training. I couldn't do anything about that. So the bar is just a lot higher when it comes to justifying engagement, even if you believe that an activity is going to help people be more successful. So you have to take all of this into account as you determine where you're going to invest your L&D resources, and make sure that you're developing the relationships that you need with the frontline team so that they see you, they see your team as partners, people who are there, right? People who are part of the team, people they see all the time, and they see you on the ground, doing the job and helping people be successful. And that's going to help people be more open to trying out new offerings that you share with them, as opposed to a program or a course from a team that I don't see very often, that when I regularly see them, it's about compliance training. That wasn't super helpful to me. Is this going to be helpful to me? That comes back to the relationship side of L&D. Next. Our next question: how do you get buy-in from frontline supervisors to help promote learning activities? So we hit this particular part of the story a few questions back, so you might want to rewind the video if maybe you've jumped ahead. I regularly ask L&D groups, different sessions around the world, who is the most challenging stakeholder in your organization to get buy-in from? I'll ask you, who's the most challenging stakeholder group? Say it out loud. I can't hear you. But is it the executive team? Is it IT? Is it compliance? Is it employees? Is it your peer group, maybe? The answer is always the same. Very rarely do I poll different groups all in the same industry and get the same answer. It's always the same. Middle management. Middle management is the most difficult stakeholder from which to gain buy-in as L&D. And it really shouldn't be that much of a surprise, because middle management is where corporate priority turns into everyday action. It's where rubber meets road in a lot of ways. And these people got a lot going on and they got no time for extra stuff. So when you hear frontline managers say, we don't have time for learning, which is a silly statement on its face, what they actually mean is, I don't have time for the thing that you're asking me to do. I got a lot going on. And this isn't going to hit the top of that priority list. I'm going to get a phone call about all the other stuff. I'm probably not going to get a phone call if we don't do this. So if you want them to support what you're doing, what you're doing needs to support what they're doing. I hope that made sense to you. So the first thing you need to do, influencing middle management, establish trust with those managers before we've asked for anything. You need to help them solve problems and hit their goals. Because again, they need to look at you as a partner, a problem solver, someone who's only going to ask for support when it makes sense because they're constantly doing things that are helpful. So if you suddenly show up and say, hey, I need something from you, you've put deposits in that account. They understand, oh, you're the team that helps with. You're the folks who provided that. I'm willing to listen because you've started to establish that relationship, built that trust. Two-way value proposition. And then you need to clarify how this new thing, the new initiative, the new offering, new program, new resource, and especially the time that's required away from the operation for people to engage with it, how is that going to benefit the team? And it doesn't matter if you're asking for 2 hours out of the operation, you're asking for days out of the operation, you're asking for 5 minutes a day. 5 minutes per shift does not sound like a lot. It is, especially when you only schedule the number of people that you need to run the business and one person calls in sick and it throws everything sideways. 5 minutes in that moment is a lot of time and a lot of disruption. And then you need to do everything that you can to not get in managers' way. Don't schedule training during periods where they're likely to get slammed. Don't ask them to attend meetings that could be an email. Understand the job, respect their time, and then show up when they need you. That's what it takes to build the relationship and the trust that'll help you gain buy-in from the most challenging stakeholder group in L&D. Confirmed. Thanks for the question. Up next, we have, how do you track training effectiveness and gather feedback from employees who aren't using computers regularly? What was the intended outcome of the training program? What was the metric that you're trying to improve on? What started this whole thing? Because that's the place to start. Ensuring that you have a measurable outcome, a metric attached to your initiative from the beginning that helps you not only design the initiative, right, connect the dots between what you're trying to achieve and what you try to help people do. That's also the metric that's going to help you determine if it worked. So that's where you begin to determine effectiveness. You don't even need to talk to people at that point. Hopefully you're anchoring that in measurable operational outcomes, right? The same measurements that are used to determine if the frontline is doing the job, if the operation is effective, are the same anchor points we can be using in L&D to determine if our solutions that help people do those jobs, complete those tasks, are also effective. Then the next part is just talk to employees. Show up in their locations, informal chats, one-on-one, what's working, what's not. Did you find that helpful? Did you engage with that course we provided? Did you see the new tool that we provided? Is it helping you? What have you heard from people around the operation? And then maybe just conduct some roundtable conversations to see, again, what's working, what's not. One more. Consider giving employees a chance to opt into maybe some alternative forms of digital feedback and communication. So maybe if you have an employee app or an application that can reach the front lines, maybe it's a communication application, task management application, mobile learning application. So if you have tools, you have options in terms of how to open up that two-way conversation so people can provide feedback. If you don't have those types of tools, don't have devices around the workplace, it doesn't mean you can't reach people. You just maybe need to look at some alternative options. I have it on pretty good authority that most people in your organization know how to text message. They just do. So maybe look at that as an option to say, well, can we allow employees to opt in to text-based exchanges? A limited number. We're not going to spam people to their phone numbers, but maybe there's a chance for people to reach out via text-based survey. So if there's a certain type of initiative, certain type of program, send people a text message afterwards, ask them what you think, and then have them provide feedback and suggestions the other direction. So it could be related to training programs, it could be related to anything that's going on inside the operation. It could be a simple text message. I get them all the time from pretty much every provider in my life. My dentist sends me reminder text messages on almost a weekly basis. People are used to it. How can we leverage similar mechanisms as long as we don't overload people so that it just becomes noise? It's a meaningful opportunity to provide feedback or answer a question. And what it comes down to is there's no one answer for how to best engage with frontline teams. Even if you do have a dedicated application that everyone can access, it still takes a strategic combination of different tactics and the effective use of those tools and effective use of your data practices to really determine where's the best place to invest. What's the right way to reach out? What's the right way to engage? Because sometimes it might be digitally via an app. Sometimes it might be via text message. Sometimes it might be in a location via the manager. Sometimes it's just you getting on site or your team being on site regularly enough to engage in those conversations and then bringing all of that feedback together. Thank you for your feedback. Up next, we have what types of grading rubric do you use for hands-on skills assessment? Now, again, in our panel conversation, we had representation from different industries on stage. So we had someone from food and beverage, someone from retail, and someone from the construction business. So some of these questions might have been tailored or targeted to specific people that were sharing their stories, which is why I reached out and got feedback from our panelists in order to share my insights and responses with you. So I have some thoughts when it comes to rubrics and assessment. The specifics are going to vary depending on the type of work that you do, right? Types of jobs that people are doing, types of tasks they're completing. But there are a few factors to consider when you're shaping a rubric as an assessment of job capability. So the first thing to consider is that the assessment should be task specific. You need to be looking at observable, specific steps of how people complete a task. Right? So not vague, generic concepts, specific step-by-step tasks, not can they use the deli slicer? There's a lot of different activity, a lot of different tasks, a lot of different things to look for involved in that one specific function. So breaking it apart, specific tasks that are observed. The assessment then has to align with the SOP, right? What are people being taught so that the training matches the assessment? Same verbiage, same expectations, maybe even the same rubric or assessment components are then used as behavior observations later. So we're looking for the same things consistently with the same verbiage. And then if something changes, the training changes, the SOP changes, the assessment needs to change if it impacts, right? So it needs to look at the assessment, evaluate it, and then adjust it as necessary so that all the pieces continue to match. So that it's not one rubric here, one rubric there, because it's one employee that's being observed and scored in all those different situations. And then the rubric needs to have clear, specific, and easy to follow language. So do not say things like demonstrates comprehensive procedural adherence. I don't know what that means. Instead, did they follow all of the required steps in order? So when you use complicated language, it creates room for interpretation. So make sure it's very clear exactly what people are looking for. And then each item should be observable and measurable. Another example, you could have a rubric that says, demonstrates good customer service. What is good customer service? Well, your good customer service may not be my good customer service. We've introduced variability to our scoring system. Instead, again, we're breaking it down to specific tasks. So in this case, we could have a task that says, confirmed the guest order before finalizing transaction. I know what that looks like. It's specific, it's observable, and it's a task within the umbrella of a customer service interaction. And then the rubric should clarify in its grading system what's a yes, no, they did it or they didn't do it, and then what needs to be scored on a scale, where maybe it's maybe they didn't do this at all, it wasn't part of this exchange, or this task wasn't required, might need improvement, meet expectation, exceed expectation, depending on your scaling. So you have to take risk factor into account when you're building the assessment, because there are certain tasks within the job that are clear yes, no. Right? If you did not do that correctly, you do not pass, do not move on, do not collect $200. If it's a yes, great. And then there are certain tasks like customer service needs improvement in this area, but maybe can still pass the assessment. So how do you weight these different factors is critical to how you're building that assessment. Some things need to be clear yes, no. Some things can be scaled differently. And then the rubric should only include items that are relevant to the job and the tasks that are being assessed. No extra, right? Don't complicate the situation. I want to know if the person is wearing their PPE properly. I do not care if they're smiling while working. Silly example, but you know what I'm talking about. So make sure you're only assessing the things that only assessing the tasks that absolutely need to be completed for someone to do this job effectively. And then the rubric, I'm still talking about rubrics. I have so many thoughts on rubrics. The rubric should offer room for providing feedback. So not just yes, no, not just needs improvement. Improvement on what? All right, what's the particulars of why this person was great in this area? Why did they exceed expectations? They need improvement. Why do they need improvement? It was a no. Why was it a no? So make sure there's expectation as well as room for that feedback so that it's not just an assessment opportunity, it's a learning opportunity, especially if someone's going to have to go back and complete some additional work in order to move forward on the job. And then let's talk for a minute about the assessors. The people ensuring that employees are ready to do the job need to be consistently trained and evaluated over time to make sure they're not introducing variability. No, this is how we really do it here. This is what I prefer. Well, I want them to assess me because they're an easy assessor. None of that should exist because, again, introduces variability, introduces risk into the conversation. So one, you have to train people that are going to do this job, not just assume managers can assess. Maybe they can. Maybe they've never done this before. They don't know what they're looking for. They got a lot going on. They just start checking boxes. I'm not saying they do that, but you never know. So one, they have to be trained. They understand how to complete this assessment consistently. And then you got to continuously check in with those folks. Don't assume because you trained someone to be an assessor 3 years ago that they're equally as good at it today. Right, so make sure we're continuing to develop and maintain connection with and evaluating these folks' ability because they're a critical gatekeeper between training and people's ability to do the job on their own. So that's a long, short list of things to consider when shaping an assessment for hands-on training. So thank you for the question. I didn't know I had that many thoughts on rubrics until now. A lot of rubrics in my past. Our next question, how do you solve for the issue of employees not having time for training? Due to lack of staffing, too much work, not being able to leave their stations, etc. See question number one in this case. Again, this is consistently the biggest challenge that L&D teams face when supporting frontline workers, so I'm not surprised that that question was submitted multiple times. There are definitely ways to overcome the limitation, but the key is that we have to be willing to evolve our mindset and then evolve our practices so that we're aligning with frontline reality rather than sticking to, well, this is the best learning strategy and expecting people to bend to us. They just won't. Thanks for asking. Up next, we have, can you share any strategies for convincing frontline leadership that critical thinking skills are relevant and important to teach frontline employees? So we're back in the conversation around stakeholder influence, frontline leadership, most difficult stakeholders to gain buy-in from, specifically talking about a specific skill set specifically. And my answer to, do I have any strategies for convincing frontline management that critical thinking skills are relevant, is no. Our next question, I'm kidding. The key is don't try to get people to buy into critical thinking skills. This isn't about critical thinking skills, though. This is a situation where common sense slams into workplace reality. Because of course critical thinking is important, especially in high-risk workplaces. We all know that. But a lot of people, regardless of their job, can't make the leap between a vaguely defined skill or topic and on-the-job application and meaningful outcomes. So you can't try to convince stakeholders that generic skills are important, whether it's critical thinking, it's communication, it's time management, any of those things. And again, common sense says, of course, these are important. But why aren't people engaging? Why aren't people buying in to the fact that we're offering these programs? There's a leap, and we have to contextualize everything to the work itself. So instead of an abstract idea like critical thinking, pick a common frontline task, an area where people have to apply critical thinking and an area where people are struggling and those struggles directly impact the business. Make your case for that. Helping people execute that task more effectively, more consistently, more safely, more accurately. Because people will understand that. It's still critical thinking. It's just not about critical thinking. And then you help people evolve their critical thinking skills as part of that solution. They can complete that relevant task. And then you help them apply the same skill set to another task and another task. That's how people develop critical thinking skills. I'm going to bet you're a pretty good critical thinker because you're hanging out with me still. So we share that in common. We're great critical thinkers. How many critical thinking classes have you gone to? None, right? Maybe one time in a management development curriculum. You don't really remember it anymore, but somehow you have the skills. How did you develop them? Because you did stuff, because you were challenged and then you worked your way through it. And then you picked something up as part of that experience and you started to apply it in other parts of your life and other parts of your job. Same idea. Doesn't have to be called critical thinking to teach people critical thinking. Great question. Do all team members go through lumber camp, salary and hourly? That's me reading a question mark. So this question was specifically for Sue, a member of our panel, and her company's retail training practices. So I reached out to Sue. Here's what she said. Hopefully this makes sense if you weren't in the room. So she said the majority of their associates hired in a retail store location go through lumber camp, the retail training program. There are a few roles where the content would not be applicable and they don't participate. But almost all of lumber camp attendees are hourly associates. So hourly frontline training program. Certain roles from non-store locations, such as headquarter departments, also attend lumber camp. So they have a familiarity with this frontline training program. This is going to include positions that directly support store operations. So they have that connection and can benefit from foundational store knowledge. Thanks, Sue. Our next question, how do you get managers to see the value of training when there's so much work to do? Already answered this one. Thanks for the question. Up next, we don't have an option to take our force off construction job sites for training. They also cannot ever get logged into our network, don't know passwords. How do we creatively reach them? The question really comes down to what are you trying to reach them with? This is difficult to answer without details, so I apologize for that. So if you do work in the construction business, maybe you are the person who's been waiting for the answer to your question. Send me a note on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to discuss in more detail or connect you with someone in the industry that might be able to dig into that detail with you. But I will throw a few thoughts into the mix. So can you make it easier for people to access digital content without complexity of network access? So go back to the example I provided earlier. Can you text them? Reach out via personal device in a simple way to provide maybe links to assets, maybe to provide information, especially if it's something you don't have to put behind a wall. So is there an easier way to reach people? Or are you deploying single sign-on? Are there certain credentials people use in certain systems on the job, whether it's to check their schedule, log hours, submit requests? Can we make it easier for people to access other systems that might be value add? And then how do you work with the team on site? Right, so we're talking kind of digital. We have a wall in terms of the access via technology. How do you work with the team on site today? So that would include folks like supervisors, job trainers, foremen. Are there opportunities to share information via these channels? So if there are people on site, is it maybe partnering with those folks? If you don't have a high-tech solution, go old school. And maybe it's a quick reminder during a meeting or a huddle of some type, maybe integrated into workplace conversations. Maybe there's a priority of this particular week or this month. Again, old school strategies, but how do we maybe use people on site as partners to convey different types of information? Maybe you have a formal coaching role where people are helping others learn new skills. Maybe you have a development program in that way. Can we build in communication and reach for information that way as well? So I don't have a specific answer to this question. I do know there's always a way to be helpful, though, even in the most challenging, limited, distributed frontline workplaces. So it really comes down to getting creative, using our resources in different ways, and then challenging ourselves to say, are there ways to overcome obstacles that maybe we think are insurmountable at the moment, but maybe thinking a little bit differently about how we use technology, use a certain platform. Maybe it's not using our platform. Maybe there's another tool in place that we can take advantage of to better reach people with the right types of support. So let me know again if I can provide any more specifics or if I can connect you with someone that can dig into that question in that specific space with you. But thanks so much. Do you have success stories to share about effective training solutions for a highly seasonal workforce with limited access to technology? Theme. How can you improve time to proficiency? So when you say time to proficiency of a seasonal workforce, this feels like an onboarding related question. And I'm going to say, yes, I have thoughts. And it starts with cutting out a lot of stuff. Also a theme in our conversation. So a full-time employee who's joining your organization for hopefully the long term, and a temporary seasonal worker who is filling a staffing gap, maybe over a holiday period. Those two people do not need the same training. They're not doing the same job. At least they should not be doing the same job. So this whole thing starts with clarifying the role of a seasonal worker. What role are they expected to play? What tasks are they expected to handle? And right-sizing the role so that it meets the level of investment and commitment you need to be making to a person who might only be around for a month, 2 months, 3 months, as it were. So if you work in retail, let's say that we have seasonal team members who are filling staffing gaps during the holiday season. Maybe that job, which would traditionally be inclusive of more tasks, we're going to narrow down those roles. Maybe this person just unloads trucks. Maybe they just stock shelves. Maybe they just pick online orders, depending on where your need is to amp up your operation. So clarify the role first. And then once we know exactly what tasks are expected to handle, narrow the training down to just the required elements of that role. So I know there was a question about technology access. Let's assume that we do have some tools in place. So what can you provide in terms of reliable knowledge, on-demand resources? I'm going to keep saying the word digital assistant that can answer common questions, take things off the board of training, because we don't need to push this at you. But if you're on the job completing your specific tasks, of course, we're going to train you how to do the job effectively, how to complete those tasks safely. But if there's a corner case situation comes up, instead of having to rely on a person next to you who you don't know, because we're not spending a lot of time in community building at this point, we want to be nice and involve people. They're part of the team, but in a different role, right? They may also be working multiple seasonal jobs, right? So we're going to get you on the job as quickly as possible. Make sure you have assistance. So it could be a digital assistant, a knowledge base where you can go, first thing we teach you to do, how to find the answer, because we know we're not going to teach you everything. So we need to crutch the experience, scaffold the experience with knowledge. If you don't have this kind of technology, give them a printed cheat sheet so they can carry it around in their pocket, common questions that they're most likely to be asked, maybe if they're working in front of customers. What are people going to come up to and ask that you're not going to know? Because we're not going to teach you everything, because we're getting you on the job quickly, because seasonal staff to close an operational gap. Maybe there's specific tasks that they have a checklist for. Maybe there's checklists that you embed in the operation. There's a binder at their location, at their workstation. Scaffold the experience and then teach them how to use those tools as a major part of their onboarding or new hire training. And then skip all the company stuff. Culture, values, mission statement, legacy, founder's name, when the company was created, all of that stuff, we don't need that in this case, because these folks are here to do a very specific job. We want to get them on the job ASAP, give them the tools that are going to help them feel confident in their ability to execute that job. And then if they stay on, because maybe a lot of seasonal folks might continue on part-time, full-time roles, that's where we can start to layer in, add more of the job training and bring in the connection, the community, the company stuff to expand their knowledge. But later on, it's just not the priority right now. So a lot of strategies on how do you ramp up and accelerate hiring when you might be bringing on a couple hundred or a couple thousand people very quickly to close an operational staffing gap. So great question. How do you get buy-in or build a learning culture at the store supervisor level? This is why reinforcement is an important part of workplace learning, because we've already talked about this one, but I'm going to talk about it again. Solve problems that managers care about, show up, help them out, foster that trust, establish a reputation as a problem-solving partner before you ever start talking about learning culture or asking for their buy-in for L&D initiatives. There we go. Our next question, we provide human services. Hard to learn those soft skills quickly. Any advice? Yes. Human skills are hard. There's no getting around that. And for me, improving the situation comes down to how clearly, again, themes, how clearly we define the job itself. So instead of focusing on skills, focus again on tasks. How are those soft skills, human skills, power skills, people skills, whichever term you prefer, how are those skills applied on the job? What do people need to do? Don't talk about active listening. You need to develop active listening skills. Common sense, we all know it's important. Hopefully you've been actively listening with me for a long time at this point, but don't talk about active listening. Talk about the types of conversations that someone in this role is going to have and what defines a quality outcome from that kind of conversation. So be clear on the job and the associated tasks, and then document proven practices to completing those tasks to achieve the best possible results. Give people as much of an opportunity to then observe people doing it well, and then practice completing those tasks, preferably before they need to do it themselves in real life. And of course, opportunities to shadow, observe, practice, it's all going to vary based on workload, available time for training, the readiness of the people that you hire, what skills are they bringing into the workforce, all of those types of factors. But you really set people up for success when you scaffold the role with clear expectations, available resources that demonstrate what good looks like consistently, and then as much opportunity to practice and refine in application as possible. That's how I believe we need to address the complexity, because it is difficult to develop people skills. And thank you for the question. How do you capture work procedures when you have a lot of unique machines and roles? I'm assuming you work in a manufacturing plant or a similar type of an environment. So this question makes me curious about your SOP process, right? How are work standards documented by your operational partners? And then how are those resources and that documentation leveraged by L&D? Because in my experience, most organizations have dedicated teams for these processes, right? They're writing operating procedures, writing manuals that define how work is done. They're leveraging maybe information from the manufacturer to shape those policies. They have safety requirements, compliance requirements, operational processes, bringing that all together to shape the standards of work. And as part of this process, there are requirements related to the introduction of a new machine, a change in a process, a shift in a role or a responsibility. So all of these pieces have to move in lockstep with one another. So there's no question in terms of how work is meant to be done, right? A machine changes, the rest of the chain changes. We change something about how the role is defined, who's doing what work, it changes the other information so that we're consistent in terms of that execution of work, especially in a high risk, high complexity environment, complex machines, safety considerations, all of those types of things, not leaving anything to chance. So I suggest reaching out to peers that are in maybe other organizations in your industry so you can benchmark your documentation processes, right? How are you doing it compared to how some other folks are doing it? And then determine how you can improve and ensure consistency in how the standard of work is defined. That's how I interpreted the question. But thanks so much for your submission and joining us in DC. Up next. Still going. You can tell why we run out of time. I would need 5 sessions in order to answer all of the questions. That's the great part about crowdsourcing questions digitally. We can explore these together. And I'm not saying I'm right, by the way, in all of these questions and answers. Hopefully I'm giving you something to explore, think about. But if you have anything you would like to add on, maybe I didn't get something quite right, or maybe you have some experience or insight that I could add to make my answer better, hit me up on LinkedIn, let me know, because happy to share additional insights. I just know what I know. I have some experience, not all of the experience. What are some knowledge training resources or solutions do you provide in emergencies, especially when folks might not or might now have access to digital tools, AI, learning materials, knowledge base, etc. I think that was probably meant to be not have access to digital tools. We'll go both directions. So let's say people don't have access to newer tools. I know of plenty of organizations that still use a phone. Crazy phone. It's got buttons on it that you press. It's not even like a piece of glass. It's just a phone. There are plenty of organizations that have a hotline from the frontline to HQ, so employees can connect directly to an expert. And sometimes it's someone who knows the product inside and out. Right? Customer comes into the store, asks a complex question, rather than sift through a lot of information, pick up the hotline, ring someone on the other side. How do I handle this? Let's put you on the phone with the customer. It works for them. In some cases, that hotline's going to safety, security, loss prevention, right? Because we know in this operation, these are the challenges that are likely to arise. This is the support people are going to need. Let's put them directly in contact with the right person or right resource. So, phone. You can also take a lesson from airlines. Lots of checklists, right? If you go to the cockpit of an airplane, I don't recommend you do that. Watch on the internet. There's examples of this all over the place on YouTube. They have printed step-by-step procedures for every likely emergency there to see, so the pilot can focus on the task instead of trying to troubleshoot on their own. There's a step-by-step checklist written by the experts who understand the equipment, understand the procedure, and they execute those flawlessly. So how do you take a page out of that book to say, I'll use an example for myself, the great power outage of 4th of July, 2004. My movie theater went dark that evening. We had thousands of people sitting in the darkness at the movie theater. I would have benefited considerably from a checklist. I would have needed a flashlight to find it, but I had my flashlight. What's the checklist? Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. We got through it, did a great job. I was lucky in the fact that it was not my first facility blackout. So I knew what to do when the lights go out. And we had drilled that with our team. But we should have made a checklist that said step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. Had those checklists positioned throughout the operation so people pick it up. Who are you? Who are you? Who are you? This is your responsibility. This is yours. Here we go. So making sure that we have clearly defined roles and resources that we're going to use, even if we have a low-tech situation. So the key is understanding the job, what challenge is likely to occur, what are the corner cases that we want to prepare for, and then provide the available tools that people are going to need at their disposal. Do you have technology? Maybe it's a digital assistant. Maybe in 2004, I would have pulled a binder with a checklist in it and said, power's out, can't get it back. What do I do? Maybe today I pull my phone, still have internet connection in this situation, ask the digital assistant, power's out, what do I do? It walks me through the process step by step. So that's how we can take advantage of those tools. So you can go analog, provide checklists, but make sure to drill people on the use of the tool. That's the one thing I'll also reinforce, is that whether it's helping people use a knowledge base, digital assistant, checklists, cheat sheet they carry with them, practice. When I worked in contact centers, the first thing we taught people when they sat down, it was not how to have a great conversation. It was not when the company was founded. It was, here's our knowledge base. Here's how you use it to solve all types of problems. Now that that's out of the way, let's dig into the things that you have to know. Anything else comes up as we go, you know exactly how to self-serve your way through that challenge. Thanks for the question. Next up, we have, how do you train for leadership and soft skills when someone with high potential on the front line to prepare them for the transition into the role of a leader? So I would love to say that the standard practice, this is what everyone is doing, is pulling the person out of the operation to engage in emerging leader activities on a regular basis. So they're going to have a blend of experiences where they go into a classroom sometimes, online training sometimes, job shadowing, mentoring activities, helping them over time build the capability and the confidence they're going to need to step into the role, but they're going to go through all of these activities before anyone hands them a set of keys. I would love to say that's the standard. And there are some organizations that do make these types of programs work, right? They have the buy-in, they have the influence, they have the control of the operation. They've protected the labor hours and the resources to do it. They're making these types of high potential programs work. They are clearly the exception and not the norm for the situation, because operations first of all, tend to rely on their top performers every day, making it hard to get access to them for development purposes. They also might not have staffing or available labor hours for this type of structured program. And then there's the challenge of what it takes to fill manager roles and keep up with demand. And if you're able to manage a structured development program at the pace needed to keep up. And the truth is, and the numbers bear out, that most frontline managers are promoted with little to no development, and most don't even expect the job. They're just the best available person to step into a role when a role becomes available. So I believe our rethink of manager enablement has to start there with the reality that a lot of managers are in today. How can we serve them and support them more effectively? Put the infrastructure in place around them to help them be successful today, and then leverage that infrastructure moving forward for people who aren't in the role yet. So there are two things that I suggest you do to help managers be more successful without disrupting the operation or needing to disrupt the operation. First, on-demand guidance. Again, could be a knowledge base, tools to help people solve common problems, could be that digital assistant we keep talking about that provides guidance, answers questions, nudges managers in the right direction. So do I have a tool in my pocket that I can rely on? Because I got promoted last week. I know how to work the store. I don't know how to process payroll. I don't know what FMLA means. Customer came in, they're very mad at me. I've never dealt with this situation before. Is there a place I can go for that help, especially if I'm the only manager in the location? My team can help me. They might not have seen some of these experiences too. So one, give me that help from day one. Two, connect me with other managers. Connect me with my peer group. Because again, I may be the only manager in this location. It's easy to feel isolated when you're a frontline manager. It can feel like you're on an island. You may be managing one location of 500 in the company. It doesn't mean you know the other 500 managers. So maybe it's a regular Zoom convo. Maybe it's a local regional get-together of managers on a regular basis. Maybe it's just a group chat that you put me in that introduces me to my peer group. Give me a place to connect and collaborate with peers so we can learn and grow together without requiring learning and development. Because there's someone out there that's seen it before. I just don't know who they are. If you can help me find that person, that goes a long way to supporting my development. And then once the infrastructure is there, right? Once we have these tools in place, then we can go back to the drawing board on high potential development, those emerging leader processes, and determine what's going to work in our workplace, what's going to help us build the talent pipeline that we're going to need based on what our forward projections look like, right? How many people we're going to need, where we're going to need these folks. Can we build a structured program, but make sure we've got that scaffolding in place when the program or the process breaks down, or to make the process that much more efficient? Because even someone who's been through a program is going to need those tools, or it shifts what you focus on in that program because you know those tools are in place. Thanks for asking. We're getting there. It's a bit of a marathon exercise for me. How long can I talk before I lose my voice? How do you structure on-the-job trainings so they are successful and efficient? How do you avoid bad habits to be transferred? I got two things for you. The first, best tip I can offer when it comes to ensuring consistent on-the-job frontline training, especially in a distributed workforce where you as L&D don't see most of the training going on. You can record it. You know what's happening. It's tracking in the LMS. You know who's out there. You're not there to support. Tell the employee what they should be learning. So you probably already have, or you hopefully have, a trainer guide with a checklist of what's supposed to be covered, maybe the desired sequence of when it's supposed to be covered, how to cover it, tips and tricks, things like that. That puts the trainer in control, but it also opens the door to a lot of, this is how we really do it here. This is what it says. This is how I do it. That creates risk and inconsistency. So in addition to that trainer guide to hold the trainer accountable, give the trainee a guide too that explains what they should be covering, what the experience should be for someone who's learning to do the job. Provide them with an outline of topics, links to related resources so they can answer questions or look things up. I don't quite understand what this means. Are we covering this right? Right? Like those types of tools. So give them the tools to hold the trainer accountable, as well as the opportunity to provide feedback about their experience. Because it's not once you're a trainer, you're a trainer. We should be measuring the effectiveness of the team that we're relying on to bring new people into the organization as quickly and efficiently as possible. And then the second thing, this part of my answer comes from Stephanie, the member of our panel. So she says within her organization, they train store managers to see themselves as, to quote, trainers all the time. So it's part of the culture of frontline management within the operation. And one tactic that they've promoted is what she calls catch them doing good. That reinforces behaviors they want to see from their staff. So they've explained to their managers that the standard that you walk past is the standard that you accept. So if a store manager notices, it's a coffee establishment, notices a barista applying too much whipped cream, or maybe they're inefficiently cleaning the smallware, or they skip a routine machine maintenance, the store manager needs to call it out. Because again, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. It's part of the manager job to drive that consistency that comes out of training. So when these types of coaching comments are the norm, baristas may even begin to see kind of a peer coach relationship with their manager. So it's not just the trainer, the manager's part of the experience. So to summarize, tackle accountability for job training from multiple angles, set expectations for the trainer, provide clarity to the trainee, and then ensure the manager is coaching to the standard. Great question. Have you developed an option where employees can take a shorter, summarized version of training, and what do you call it? I have long been fascinated and excited about the notion of pre-assessment, the option for employees to test out of training, to skip stuff they just don't need, especially on the front line. And the truth is, we've been able to do this forever, right? Whether you're manually testing people's knowledge and capability when they first start out, or if you're using digital tools to gauge their capability. But the question hasn't been, can we do it? The question's always been risk tolerance, right? How far will the organization allow L&D to go when it comes to skipping over training or allowing people to not do something, not check a box? Talk about checking boxes all the time. What if we don't check the box? Because there are always going to be certain required topics, right? We're not getting out of that like annual anti-money laundering module anytime soon. That's got to happen. But what about the non-compliance stuff, right? The foundational job training stuff, the stuff that's important, but there's an option there, right? People may be bringing that knowledge and skill into the role with them because maybe they've done it before. So over time, I am seeing organizations become more and more comfortable with what I'm going to call fast tracking people, especially as organizations look to do more with less. They're trying to mitigate labor spend, especially as related to training. So they're open to new opportunities to do it as long as you've got a strategy, as long as you don't add risk to the equation. So fast tracking is absolutely a value add frontline practice. And the key is determining which topics should remain required and which ones can you provide an option that if people feel ready, not force them to, but if they feel ready, they can accelerate their path. And then ensuring that you provide continued support after people do it. Because let's say someone fast tracks through a topic. They've worked in retail for years. They're starting a new retail role. They understand how to transact payment, how to count cash, how to use different types of point of sale systems, right? They know the mechanics of the job. They fast track through it. They prove that they can do it. Maybe there's certain things they don't quite recall, though. Maybe there's nuances that they don't quite understand. Well, you need to make sure to have a support structure behind that assessment. So you're reinforcing that critical knowledge. So maybe if they passed the test, they completed a performance assessment, they're good to go. They don't have to take the training. You're going to make sure you refresh things later on to make sure you close those gaps. So it's the key of bringing that strategy together that makes fast tracking people and kind of shortening the training time a great opportunity with frontline teams. So great question. Great idea. What are the odds? The next question is, how do you feel about pre and post testing? Clearly, I love it. Thanks for asking. No, I do. I love pre-assessment. Personalize, adapt, train to fit individual needs. Benefits the person, benefits the organization. Love it. And you need a gate in place to make sure that people are ready to do the job, both what they know, their ability to confidently and consistently and safely do the job in real life. So that's where the post-training assessment comes in. So yes, pre-assessment, accelerate the path. Yes to post-training assessment, make sure they're ready to go. Love it. How do you balance expectations of leaders owning training and developing their teams with a large number of direct reports that they have? The largest number of direct reports I ever had in an operation was over 200 people in a frontline management role. So saying I'm responsible for the development of 200 people, in addition to the fact that I'm running the operation, daunting. So first you have to look at what's the manager's job description. Right? What are they expected to do when it comes to developing their team members? How does that get prioritized day to day in the work? And then the biggest one, how is that reflected in how managers are measured? And I always talk about getting phone calls as a frontline manager. What gets you a phone call? That's what you prioritize. Because if your regional manager is going to call you because of your customer service scores from yesterday, I'm going to prioritize customer service scores. If we're looking at concession sales, and that's not only how I'm measured by corporate, that's how I'm bonused personally, I'm going to prioritize concession sales. So we have to understand how managers are prioritized and how they're measured. So you need to answer these questions before you can clarify the role that managers then are expected to play as part of workforce learning and development. Because it's great to think that managers own the team development. They're there every day. You as L&D aren't there. They're there. Right there, I always say frontline employees don't work for the company, they work for their manager. Because that's the person, hires them, schedules them, coaches them, makes sure they get paid, and often fosters opportunity for them. But how often is the manager afforded the resources and the time to focus on the team? And are they trained to teach and develop? Because it might not be a natural skill set. Someone may be a great operator, a great manager. Doesn't mean they're a great teacher. It's something we have to help people do. There are some people who are just great at it. We can't expect everyone to be great at it because they have a certain job title. And then is team development prioritized? Especially when managers are hired. Like, are we looking for people that want to do that and that are good at it? And this is where kind of expectations fall down a lot because managers are held accountable to other stuff. Like I said, the phone calls, and people development usually isn't on the bonus plan. It's not something you get a phone call about. And it's easy to get pushed aside. And it's not because managers don't care or they're not interested. They just already work 75 hours a week just to get the job done. And you end up in a situation where you have these exceptional managers that find the time somehow, and they foster development, and they're amazing teachers, and they're great mentors. And then a lot of employees get left behind because they didn't luck into one of those managers. They didn't happen to work at that location with that person. I use the name Kathy to represent the exceptional manager because the best manager I ever met on the front line was named Kathy. So start with the job, right? What are people prioritized to do when they're managers? And how does it relate to how they're measured? Because if they are measured based on team development, right? Talent, mobility, retention, engagement, any metrics associated to the frontline experience, you're going to have a hard time making it a priority for them. And it's not because they don't care. Just because they have a lot to do, and it comes down to what's going to get them a phone call. Great question. How do you handle generational differences of managers and new hires? So I'm assuming they're of different ages. Some are not paying it forward to new hires and giving them what they were given. As they say, this generation doesn't stick around. So I am apt to say that this isn't a problem of generations. I think we're talking about workplace evolution. So it's not a young people these days. It's not anything associated with demographics, in my opinion. We have to consider how the workplace itself has changed between generations. So think backwards. Maybe you were there. Maybe you have to talk to some people. What did the company value 20 years ago? What did this job look like back then? What did the workload look like? How much time did people dedicate to training and development? How long was onboarding and new hire 20 years ago? How often, when you shared expertise, when you were the go-to, when you were the mentor, when you were the trainer, what did that mean 20 years ago? Did it open new doors for you? Did it earn you respect? Did you make more money because you were that person 20 years ago? What's that like today? How do the situations compare? Now, I don't know your company. I bet things are different. So we can't blame the worker or wish that things are the way they used to be. We got to adapt and move forward because the organization has. The question is, have we kept pace? Have our practices helped employees function and thrive in the new version of work rather than run into walls because it's not the old version of work anymore? So this means finding new ways. If we have to capture tacit knowledge and make insights available to new team members, maybe we can't rely on the legacy team members handing that over or sharing or making that part of their job, because maybe that's just not the culture anymore. How do we build the business case, for investments and development to ensure that critical skills don't walk out the door and people retire or when they move on? Maybe in the past, it was a more natural flow or evolution of knowledge in the workplace. Maybe now it needs to be more structured, or we need to document information differently. We can use AI to do things differently. So ultimately, it just comes down to we can't leave it up to the frontline workforce because they already got enough to do and the job is hard enough. We have to adapt to the current environment and make the case for change in our practices to meet the moment, because what made us successful yesterday is not going to get us where we need to go tomorrow. A lot of these strategies sound amazing. This question somehow listened to this video already and really effective. Thank you. I'll say thank you on behalf of the panel because they did most of the talking in the real life session. This person's complimenting them, not me. How can you scale these strategies for 200,000 plus workers or 7,000 plus locations or a global presence? So I see our job as L&D professionals is to provide equitable support. It means everyone has a chance. That's what we do, in my opinion. So it doesn't matter if you have 5 locations, you have 5,000 locations. It's what we do. So scale, equity has to be a guiding principle, a pillar built into the strategy from the start. And the trick here is that we can't confuse scale with sameness, because building a catalog of training content, translating it into like 20 languages, and then making it available to every employee in the world, that is not a scalable enablement strategy. People can reach it, but we have not achieved scale. So L&D has to balance centralized strategy with decentralized execution so that we can balance consistency and scalability. There's often a debate, kind of pendulum swings back and forth, centralized L&D, decentralized L&D, especially within a large distributed global operation. I believe it's a combination that makes it work. A centralized team that can architect a digital ecosystem of tools, manage corporate requirements, compliance requirements, set expectations, craft what the experience should be. But then their job is to put tools in the hands of the people on the front line to bring those practices to life through technology, through data, through AI. How do they foster a personalized support at scale? So you need people closer to the ground to make that happen, where the work gets done. Right? They're going to scale the strategy so it has the best possible impact. You can't do that from the corporate office. This might include a team of people who are maybe associated to each brand under a corporate umbrella. It might include a network of local trainers that are continuously engaged as part of the process because they're going to apply the centralized tools in a localized way that makes sense based on how work is done, region to region, location to location. And it definitely requires the management team and clarifying, well, what's the role we expect location managers to play within our learning ecosystem? So frontline enablement can work at scale. I have seen it many times. The largest organization I've ever worked with had 800,000 employees across 30 plus brands, thousands of properties. I know it works. I believe frontline enablement is more scalable, actually, than a lot of corporate training is, because frontline work is concrete. It's well-defined. It's measurable. This gives us a head start as L&D in architecting an infrastructure that works at scale to provide right fit support. So it's not only achievable, it's doable. But our focus has to be providing equitable, right fit support rather than taking a content-centric approach because that content-centric approach or course-centric approach gets overwhelmed quickly based on the complexities of scale. So rather than rely on generic one-size-fits-none courses, it's about providing right fit support, enabling local implementation and application with centralized tools and strategy. Thanks for the question. Almost there. What advice do you have for an organization that wants to build an academy of their own to embed the culture and basic skills from day one? My biggest suggestion is to make sure that any type of academy is present in the job, not just the lead up to the job, because terms like academy or university can run contrary to modern learning principles like learning in the flow of work and real-time guidance and performance support. They kind of conjure images of place and time activity, school, right? And they often rely on that version of training in some cases. And I think that falls short. So structured training, in a classroom, online, on the job, all critical parts of frontline enablement because the work is difficult, it's high risk, it's complex, and people need dedicated, focused time to get it right, especially when they're early in the role. But learning just can't stop there. Right? We can't rely on managers and peers just to kind of pick up where an academy leaves off. So the question becomes, as you shape a learning program, consider how people will access related support topics and tools when they're on the job. How do they find information when they forget what they learned in the academy? How do you reinforce key knowledge and ensure it sticks after they leave the academy? How do you make sure managers are coaching consistently and providing actionable feedback on topics related to what people learned? And if you're familiar, you'll notice I'm walking you through the modern learning ecosystem. My first book available at jdwroteabook.com. That's essentially what this is. We're shaping an ecosystem around the academy to make the academy that much stronger. So you have to consider that entire ecosystem when you're architecting any kind of training program, because what happens in the field is way more important than what happens in a classroom, because that's the nature of frontline work. You've done a great job. Again, we knew. Outlining needs for organizations with training frontline workers. Again, compliment for the panel, not for me. So thank you, panel. Can you address the specific needs of frontline workers? So, like I said, thank you on behalf of the panel at ATD25. I don't quite understand the question in this case. Now, it's important to note when we talk about the frontline workforce, we're not talking about one thing. The frontline's a complex, very dynamic group of people who do different types of jobs in pretty much every industry. So we can't address one need and suggest, well, that's going to work for everybody. That said, there are a common set of attributes that define frontline work across industries. And it doesn't matter if you're maybe a theme park employee, you're a bank teller, you're a metal worker, you likely have similar attributes. You have limited autonomy, you're working defined shifts with assigned responsibility, you're likely part of a group that does similar work. So maybe it's a large team with like roles. A lot of these jobs are mobile, so you're away from a desk. We talked about the fact you don't have an email address. You likely don't have a company-issued device, so you're hard to reach with basic information. And you come with unique background, unique skills, and experience that you're bringing to the job. So there's shared attributes around the frontline. And L&D strategy has to align with this frontline persona if we hope to help people do their jobs as best as possible. So this requires a strategic combination of tactics, right? A blend of experiences that brings together hands-on job training, on-demand support coaching, the modern learning ecosystem to boost capability, comfort, and confidence, the 3 C's of frontline enablement that I talk about a lot. And then from there, it depends a lot on the job, right? The tasks that people are going to do every day, the environment in which the job is done, and then the tools people use on the job. And L&D teams, we need to have an intimate understanding of these different factors so that we can shape a support experience that really fits, because we can't typically change how the job is done. So we have to fit our ecosystem around the reality of the job and then make a very strong business case if we somehow need the nature of the work to change to help people do that work most effectively. So I hope that answers at least part of your question. And thanks so much. How do you move the needle with employees who are busy, overworked, and work in an environment that does not allow them to engage with training? I could have bashed every question about the limits of time on the front line. I didn't do it because I wanted to make a point. Because sometimes I see organizations recognize this challenge and maybe budget additional labor hours to make it work. But more often, I run into the do more with less mindset that crunches L&D as more and more organizations crunch labor hours. Meanwhile, the workload often doesn't get smaller. A lot of times it increases. So I think we could bang our hands on the table and we could complain to people in operations because they don't see the value in learning. Or we could adapt our mindset, evolve our practices to fit within the evolving frontline reality. Because in doing so, we're building our business case for additional investment because we're finding ways to add value without adding complexity or disruption. So hopefully our time together today has given you a lot of ideas how to overcome the biggest challenge in frontline enablement. Do all your frontline workers have the same training journey, or is it adapted based on their prior knowledge or experience? So I've supported more than 300 frontline workplaces over the past 15 years, and it's always a balancing act. So there are some topics that everyone needs to complete. You got safety, compliance, foundational job training. There are always boxes that need to be checked for different reasons. But over time, I've seen more and more opportunity for organizations to personalize training throughout the experience. So if someone has worked in retail for the past decade, they don't need to complete basic cash handling. If someone makes a mistake on the job, doesn't mean everyone needs to get retrained on that topic. But opening the door for a more personalized experience means shifting the organization's mindset regarding the role L&D plays and then how we help mitigate risk while enabling performance. And a lot of it comes down to data practices, how effectively we can demonstrate what do people know, what are they able to do, and how we use these insights to inform operational decisions. For example, let's take a contact center agent. One of the contact center agents clicks the link. You know what link I'm talking about. Should they get a refresher on cybersecurity? Sure. Should the entire team? No. But it's a lot easier to make that case to legal or to IT when you can show, well, what does everyone else on the team know? Have they successfully avoided phishing attempts in the past? Have they completed reinforcement on the topic lately that shows, oh, they know, right? So with AI and with advanced data practices, we can now adapt learning and support people in personalized ways like we never have before. And we can use pre-assessments like I talked about to set a baseline for each employee and then cater the learning experience to people's needs. And this means that we can get people the support they need when and where they need it. We can accelerate time to proficiency, we can reduce training time, cut down on labor spend, and remove operational disruption. But first, we need to demonstrate that focusing on individual needs, giving people the chance to bypass training, to fast track their way through because they don't need it, is going to lead to positive outcomes without adding risk. Thanks for your question. Up next, how do you ensure franchisees take the training? So I've worked with some franchise businesses where training requirements, especially around things like compliance, are baked into the franchise agreement. So the training is mandated from the corporate side, and it's something that people are held accountable to that way. But I also asked Stephanie from our panel for her perspective, especially when you can't mandate training in some or maybe in any form. And what Stephanie said was to consider incentivizing engagement by tracking completion of certain activities for franchisees, for store managers, and frontline workers, and then translating that data into what she calls a training index score, which is one of many factors that can be used when you're formulating a franchisee power ranking, basically where people rank among franchisees. A power ranking score balances the weight of operational excellence factors like 70% with sales like 30%. And then this actually triggers competition among franchisees, which can motivate people to prioritize activities that they're measured on. And then another factor to consider is how you position learning and development across the organization. Is it just about completing courses, or is learning embedded across the culture in everything that you do? And as she says, this includes everything from a company messaging to town halls to resources, as well as the way jobs are defined and the expectations that you have for managers, which is something Stephanie has mentioned a few times. So that comes down to learning isn't a thing you do, it's the way the business works. And this kind of mindset sets the stage for all different types of learning related activities, from the stuff that you have to do to the stuff that you know can make a difference for people who are doing the job. So thanks again to Stephanie for your feedback, and thanks for your question. Up next, how do you engage more tenured field leadership in updating training materials? So I interpret this question as a bit of a, how do you teach an old dog kind of question? Not calling anyone a dog. That's just how the statement goes. But how do you get the people who've been around to think differently? Because there are people in your frontline operation who've been doing this for a long time. Some of those people created the way that this job is done. But over time, things change. But updating an SOP is a lot easier than changing behavior. And it's even more difficult to shift what people believe to be important because they know the right way to do this job. So it's really a question of how you get people to change. And going back to Stephanie, she offered one suggestion. Her team leverages tenured store managers and DMs, district managers, not digital managers. I've been talking a long time. District managers as reviewers for their content. They provide feedback on aging items and share fresh ideas for new resources. So they have a part in the process and help to facilitate the change rather than just being told to do the job that they know so well to do it differently for reasons. And then Stephanie's team also invites store managers to be featured presenters in their system-wide webinars and town halls. And it's a great example of L&D's role in what I always call building heroes. Because again, people don't want to be us. We're cool. They don't want to be us. They want to be like their successful peers. So elevate those people rather than fighting against them is a great example. And then there's also a question of accountability here, right? If processes change and people don't shift how the job is done, someone should step in, right? Provide feedback and course correct. So again, I'm going to ask the question about relationships with L&D and the management team. Are you seen as a partner or a corporate function that adds tasks to an already overflowing task list? When you're seen as a partner, you can set expectations and hold people accountable more comfortably. If you're seen as a disruption, someone who doesn't understand how things really work here, it doesn't work as well. So focus on building the relationship. Get it out into the operation regularly. Demonstrate not just an understanding, but an empathy for the people who do this kind of job. That'll help close that behavior change gap. Thanks for the question. Speaking of gaps in the operation, how do you fill the important gaps due to product complexity after bootcamp when the business won't allow a longer live training time? So this question seems to be directed at Sue for her retail team's training strategy. So I reached out to Sue. Sue highlighted that product knowledge training is ongoing for associates in their stores. So of course, it's impossible for associates to nail down the details of every product you offer, especially if you work in a large store, work with complex products and services, anything like that. So along the way, her team uses multiple methods, including there's a mobile training app with vendor-produced product training and microlearning courses for people that are incentivized to engage with. So the vendor in this case is the company that produces the product that are sold in the stores. And therefore, they're motivated to ensure frontline associates are knowledgeable about those offerings so they can sell them effectively. So this is something I see a lot in electronics retailers. I see it in telecommunications organizations. Anyone who has complex products and services, a lot of third-party training content is provided to those frontline teams. Then Sue's team also offers internally produced 5-minute videos on topics like product knowledge and other store-related processes. And these videos are available in the LMS. They're accessible via the intranet and the internal communications app. So again, that kind of reiterates the importance of making information easy to find and access and not locking it behind a wall that frontline team members are less likely to go looking for. There's also in-store training with vendor reps, again, to ensure associates can speak intelligently to their products. And finally, they offer advanced product knowledge online courses for core product lines. So that's another great example of focusing. What are the most critical topics, the critical information, and then balancing what you expect people to know, those advanced core products, versus things they might be able to reference on the job that are less likely to come up or less likely to be part of making them successful. So thanks again, Sue, for sharing your insights. How do you change your training methods for neurodiverse individuals and those who learn differently? I'm happy to say This is our final question. And I don't have an answer for this question because I am not an expert in the subject and I would not attempt to offer advice. What I can offer is a resource. This resource. This is very heavy. I'm going to hold it up for a limited period of time because this is designed for how people are. Sorry, it's not designed for how people learn. This is designed for all learners. I've been talking for a while. Designed for All Learners by Sarah Mercier. So what Sarah did was she brought together a community of practitioners to share their insights and experience into how we can help everyone do their best work. And like I said, it's a big book because it's packed with a lot of real world examples. And I love what Sarah always says. She always says that if it's not accessible, it's not done. So what I'd recommend, if you want to make sure that your resources are ready to go, right fit, providing the most value, grab a copy of this book because it's going to help you ensure that your strategy is good for the entire workforce. And that includes every member of your frontline team. So again, designed for all learners. Sarah Mercier, check it out. And that is it. That wraps up our virtual Q&A. I only got the name of one book wrong the whole time. So that is the end of our story for our amazing ATD25 panel on frontline training practices. So again, thanks to Sue, Stephanie, Rocky, and Shannon for your generosity with your insights during our conversation. Thanks to everyone who joined us live in Washington, D.C. to highlight the challenges and the opportunities with your frontline workforce. And thanks to you for hanging out with me for however long this conversation took. But again, every question deserves an answer. So hopefully I did a decent job of providing that. And of course, I want to plug my next book, The Frontline Enablement Playbook, which is in editing right now. And it's hopefully going to drop in May 2026. So to follow our progress as we craft the industry's first guide to helping frontline employees do their very best work every day, head over to the website, frontlineplaybook.com. And then be sure to like this video, subscribe to LearnGeek on YouTube for even more insights into how we can do a great job helping others do a great job. And until next time, I'm JD. Thanks so much for everything that you do, and be well. Bye now.